The wind carried the distant whistle of the approaching train, as Lillian Gardner clutched her shivering 5-year-old daughter Emma to her chest, tears streaming uncontrollably down her face. The Clearwater Junction depot stood lonely against the vast Wyoming landscape, the setting sun painting the wooden platform in hues of orange and gold that belied the darkness consuming Lillian's heart. It was October 1885, and Lillian had never felt more alone. Her once fine dress, now travel-worn and dusty, told the story of a desperate journey west that had culminated in this moment of utter despair. The letter from her late husband's brother promising work and shelter had been nothing but a cruel lie. She'd arrived to find him gone, the homestead abandoned, and herself stranded with nothing but a carpet bag containing their meager possessions and barely enough money for a single meal. "Mama, I'm cold," Emma whispered, her small fingers gripping Lillian's sleeve. "I know, sweetheart," Lillian replied, wiping her tears with the back of her hand, determined to be strong for her daughter. "We'll figure something out." The sound of spurs jingling on the wooden platform made Lillian stiffen. She'd learned to be wary of strangers, especially men, in the 3 years since her husband Thomas had passed from tuberculosis. She kept her eyes down, hoping whoever approached would simply pass them by. Instead, the footsteps stopped directly in front of her bench. A tall shadow fell across them, and Lillian reluctantly looked up. The man standing there wore a weather-beaten Stetson pulled low over his brow. His denim pants were dusty from the trail, and a worn leather vest covered his cotton shirt. A revolver hung at his hip, but it was his eyes that caught Lillian's attention, kind eyes, deep blue like a mountain lake, studying her with concern. "Even in, madam," he said, his voice gentle but rich with the roughness of the frontier. "Forgive my intrusion, but it looks like you and the little one could use some help." Lillian instinctively held Emma tighter. "We're fine, sir, just waiting for someone." The man's gaze swept the empty platform, then returned to her face with quiet understanding. "No offense intended, but that depot closes in 10 minutes, and the next train doesn't come through till morning. Station master's mighty particular about locking up on time." As if to confirm his words, the station master emerged from the small office, keys jangling in his hand, throwing them an impatient glance. The stranger cleared his throat. "Name's Kieran Dawson. I've got a wagon outside and was heading back to town. Clearwater's got a decent boarding house where you and your daughter could get a hot meal and a warm bed." "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Dawson, but Lillian faltered, not wanting to admit she couldn't afford even a single night's lodging. Kieran's gaze softened. "Madam, I'm not one to pry into another's troubles, but this is no place for a child when night falls." He knelt down to Emma's level. "What's your name, little miss?" Emma peered at him from behind her mother's arm. "Emma," she whispered. "That's a mighty pretty name," Kieran smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "How would you and your mama like to meet my horse? His name's Thunder and he loves carrots." Emma's eyes widened with interest, but she looked to her mother for permission. Lillian felt trapped between pride and desperation. The evening chill was deepening and she had nowhere to go. Her daughter's welfare had to come before her pride. "Mr. Dawson," she said softly, "I must be honest. We arrived expecting to meet my brother-in-law, but he's gone. I have very little money for lodging." Kieran stood, removing his hat respectfully. "Madam, I'd never leave a lady and her child stranded. I've got some credit at Mrs. Wilson's boarding house. You can stay there tonight, no strings attached, and tomorrow we'll figure things out." The station master cleared his throat loudly. "Closing up now, folks." With resignation and gratitude, Lillian gathered their small carpet bag. "Thank you, Mr. Dawson. We accept your kindness." Kieran offered his arm, which Lillian hesitantly took, and led them to a sturdy wagon hitched to a magnificent chestnut stallion. Emma's eyes grew wide at the sight of the horse. "Thunder," Kieran said, lifting the little girl so she could stroke the horse's nose. "Meet Miss Emma and Mrs. Gardner," Lillian supplied. "Lillian Gardner, and this is truly kind of you." "Folks help each other out here," Kieran replied simply, helping them onto the wagon seat. "That's how we survive." As they rode toward town, the vast Wyoming sky darkened to deep purple, stars emerging like diamonds scattered across velvet. Emma, exhausted from their long journey, soon fell asleep against her mother's side. "If you don't mind my asking," Kieran said quietly, "where were you headed before your plans changed?" Lillian sighed, watching the road ahead. "My husband's brother wrote that he had a homestead near Clearwater, said he needed help running it and we could live there. Thomas, my husband, died 3 years ago. We've been struggling in Chicago ever since." Kieran nodded thoughtfully. "What's your brother-in-law's name?" "James Gardner. The station master said he sold his claim and moved on months ago." A look of recognition crossed Kieran's face. "Gardner. Had a place about 10 miles east, tall fellow with a red beard." "Yes," Lillian said, surprise evident in her voice. "You knew of him. He sold that homestead to the Harrison family last spring. Word was he headed to California." Kieran glanced at her sympathetically. "I'm sorry you came all this way for nothing." Lillian blinked back fresh tears. "Not your burden to bear, Mr. Dawson. Kieran, please," he said softly. The lights of Clearwater came into view, a small but proper town with wooden boardwalks, a church steeple rising above the other buildings, and several stores lining the main street. Mrs. Wilson's boarding house was a 2-story white clapboard building with a wide porch and cheerful yellow lamplights spilling from its windows. Despite the late hour, the proprietress herself answered the door, a plump, silver-haired woman with shrewd eyes that softened at the sight of the sleeping child. "Kieran Dawson, bringing strays again," she said, but her tone was kind. "Mrs. Wilson, this is Mrs. Gardner and her daughter. They need a room for tonight." The woman nodded, ushering them inside to a cozy parlor warmed by a crackling fire. "I've got one room left with a nice big bed, and there's stew keeping warm in the kitchen if you're hungry." Emma stirred, blinking sleepily. "Food, Mama." "Yes, sweetheart," Lillian said, her own stomach clenching with hunger. They hadn't eaten since early morning. Kieran set their bag down. "Put it on my account, Mrs. Wilson." Before Lillian could protest, he turned to her with a gentle smile. "Get some rest, Mrs. Gardner. Things often look brighter in the morning. I'll stop by tomorrow to see how you're settling in." After he left, Mrs. Wilson led them to a small but clean dining room where she served bowls of hearty beef stew and fresh bread. "Eat up," she encouraged. "You look like you could use it." As they ate, Mrs. Wilson chatted amiably, her motherly presence comforting. "Kieran Dawson's one of the good ones," she remarked. "Foreman at the Circle D Ranch, honest as the day is long." "He's been very kind," Lillian agreed cautiously, "saved up and bought his own piece of land last year." Building it up bit by bit. Mrs. Wilson refilled their bowls. "Not many men would stop to help strangers, but that's Kieran for you. Lost his sister and her husband to fever some years back. Took in their boy and raised him right." Later, lying in the soft bed with Emma curled against her, Lillian stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. Tomorrow she would need to find any work to support them until she could save enough for train tickets back east. But back to what? The tiny room they'd shared with another widow and her 3 children. The endless hours of sewing that barely paid for their bread, sleep eventually claimed her, and she dreamed of open skies and possibilities she dared not name. Morning came with the scent of coffee and bacon. After breakfast, Lillian asked Mrs. Wilson about work opportunities in town. "Well," the older woman considered, "the general store might need help, and there's always laundry and mending if you're handy with a needle." "I am," Lillian confirmed. "I worked as a seamstress in Chicago." Mrs. Wilson's eyes brightened. "Is that so? Why, Mrs. Hartley at the dress shop's been looking for someone with proper training. Her eyes aren't what they used to be." Before Lillian could respond, a knock at the door announced Kieran's arrival. He traded his trail clothes for a clean shirt and vest, his hair still damp from washing. "Morning, ladies," he greeted them, hat in hand. Emma, who had been shy the night before, ran to him with unexpected enthusiasm. "Mr. Kieran, can we see thunder again?" he laughed, a rich, warm sound. "Of course, little miss. But first, I've come with a proposition for Mrs. Gardner." Lillian looked at him questioningly. "I spoke with Sheriff Mills this morning. Turns out your brother-in-law didn't just leave town, he left owing money to half the businesses here." Kieran's expression was apologetic. "But the good news is his homestead claim wasn't properly transferred. There was a problem with the paperwork. What does that mean? Lillian asked. It means, Kieran explained, that as his only living relative, you might have a claim to the property. The Harrisons paid him, but they never filed the proper documents. The sheriff says you should talk to Judge Wilson, Mrs. Wilson's husband, about your rights. Hope flickered in Lillian's heart, quickly followed by doubt. But I don't know the first thing about running a homestead. That's part of my proposition, Kieran said. I need someone to keep house and cook for the ranch hands at Circle D while our regular cook recovers from a broken leg. It's decent pay, and you and Emma would have a cabin to yourselves on the property. Meanwhile, we can sort out the claim situation. Lillian hesitated. I wouldn't want to impose further. It's not charity, Mrs. Gardner, Kieran interrupted gently. We genuinely need the help, and you need work. As for the homestead, if it's rightfully yours, you could sell it properly and have enough to start fresh wherever you choose. Mrs. Wilson nodded encouragingly. It's a respectable position, dear. The Circle D is a fine operation. Lillian looked at Emma, who was watching the adults with curious eyes. A cabin of their own, steady work, and possibly a claim to land that could secure their future. It was more than she had dared hope for yesterday. Very well, Mr. Dawson, she said at last. We accept your offer. That afternoon, Kieran drove them to the Circle D ranch, located in a picturesque valley surrounded by rolling hills. The main house was a substantial two-story structure, with a bunkhouse, barn, and several outbuildings nearby. A small cabin stood a short distance from the main house, simple but solid, with a porch and a small garden plot. This will be yours, Kieran said, helping them down from the wagon. It's where our previous cook lived. Inside, the cabin was basic but clean, with a bedroom, a small sitting area, and a kitchen. Emma immediately claimed a corner where a shelf held a few battered children's books. The men take their meals in the cookhouse, Kieran explained. Breakfast at sunrise, dinner at noon, supper at dusk. 6 ranch hands plus myself and my nephew, Jackson. He's 12 now, living in the main house with me. When would you like me to start? Lillian asked, already mentally planning meals. Tomorrow's soon enough. Get settled today. He headed for the door, then paused. Mrs. Gardner, I meant what I said at the depot. Things will work out, I promise. The words seemed to hang in the air between them, weighted with something Lillian wasn't ready to examine. Thank you, she said simply. Life at the Circle D quickly fell into a rhythm. Lillian rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for the hungry cowboys, then spent her mornings baking bread and preparing the noon meal. Afternoons were for washing, mending, and tending the small vegetable garden behind their cabin. Emma, after initial shyness, blossomed in the open spaces, following Jackson around and learning about ranch life. Judge Wilson confirmed that Lillian had a legitimate claim to her brother-in-law's homestead, but advised waiting until spring to visit the property. The Harrisons, upon learning of the situation, were willing to negotiate a fair price to properly purchase the land. As October turned to November, Lillian found herself watching for Kieran each day. Unlike some of the cowhands who were rough around the edges, he always removed his hat in her presence, thanked her for every meal, and often brought small treats for Emma: a piece of rock candy, a carved wooden horse, a ribbon for her hair. One evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Lillian sat on her porch wrapped in a shawl against the autumn chill. Kieran approached from the main house, carrying something in his hands. Evening, Mrs. Gardner, he said, settling on the porch step. Thought you might like some company. In the lamplight spilling from the window, she could see he held 2 mugs of steaming coffee. She accepted one gratefully. How are you settling in? He asked. Well, I think. The men seemed pleased with the meals, and Emma, Lillian smiled fondly. She's never been so happy. Children adapt quickly, Kieran observed. Jackson's taken quite a shine to her, says she reminds him of his mother, though he barely remembers her. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their coffee. May I ask you something personal, Mr. Dawson? Lillian ventured. Kieran, he corrected gently. And yes, you may. Why have you never married? A man with property, respected in the community. Surely there have been opportunities. He looked thoughtfully into his coffee. There were, I suppose. Never met anyone who made me want to change my ways. My sister's death hit me hard. She was all the family I had left. Then raising Jackson, Time just passed, he glanced at her. And you're young to be widowed. Thomas was never strong, Lillian said softly. We married when I was 18, had Emma a year later. He worked as a clerk, but the consumption took hold and… She shook her head. The last 3 years have been about survival. You've done well by your daughter, Kieran said. She's a credit to you. Thank you. Lillian felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee. I should turn in. Early morning tomorrow, Kieran stood, taking her empty mug. Good night, Mrs. Gardner, Lillian, she said impulsively. If I'm to call you Kieran, then you should call me Lillian. His smile in the darkness made her heart flutter strangely. Good night, Lillian. As November progressed, such evening conversations became a regular occurrence. Lillian learned about Kieran's childhood in Missouri, his journey west after the war, and his dreams for the future. In turn, she shared stories of her life in Chicago, her love of reading, and her hopes for Emma. The first snow fell in early December, transforming the ranch into a wonderland that delighted Emma. Kieran taught her to make snow angels, while Jackson built her a small sledge to ride down the gentle slope behind the cabin. With Christmas approaching, Lillian began secretly sewing gifts: a new shirt for Kieran, a quilt for Jackson, scarves for the ranch hands. For Emma, she worked late into the night on a rag doll with embroidered features and a calico dress. 2 weeks before Christmas, a fierce blizzard struck, confining everyone to their dwellings. Kieran braved the swirling snow to check on Lillian and Emma, arriving with an armload of firewood and provisions. Storm might last a couple days, he said, stamping snow from his boots. You have enough wood. We should, yes, Lillian assured him, helping him stack the additional logs by the fireplace. Emma, excited by the adventure of the storm, convinced Kieran to play checkers with her. As they sat on the floor by the fire, Lillian watched them from her rocking chair, needle flashing as she worked on her Christmas gifts. The domesticity of the scene struck her suddenly. How natural it felt to have Kieran in their home, how much like a family they appeared. The thought should have frightened her, but instead it filled her with a quiet joy. That night, after Emma was asleep, they sat before the fire drinking hot cider. I've been meaning to ask, Kieran said hesitantly. What are your plans come spring? Will you sell the homestead and return east? Lillian considered the question. A few months ago, I would have said yes without hesitation, but now, she gazed into the flames. Emma loves it here, she's thriving, and she paused, searching for words. And you, Kieran prompted softly. I've found peace here, she admitted. But a woman alone with a homestead, it wouldn't be easy. Kieran set his mug down and turned to face her fully. Lillian, you wouldn't have to be alone, her heart stuttered. What are you saying? I'm saying that I care for you, for Emma too. His voice was steady, but she could see the vulnerability in his eyes. I know it hasn't been long, and if you need time, I understand. But I want you to know that if you chose to stay, you wouldn't be facing it alone. Lillian's hands trembled. Kieran, A loud crack from the fire made them both start. A log had split, sending sparks up the chimney. The moment broken, Kieran stood. Think about it, no rush. He moved toward the door. I should get back to check on Jackson. Kieran, Lillian called as he reached for his coat. When he turned, she crossed the room to him, gathering her courage. Standing on tiptoe, she pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. Thank you for everything. His eyes darkened with emotion, and for a moment she thought he might pull her into his arms. Instead, he gently touched her face, then donned his coat and hat. Sleep well, Lillian, he said, and was gone into the swirling snow. The blizzard lasted 3 days, during which Lillian had ample time to consider Kieran's words. By the time the sun emerged to sparkle on the pristine white landscape, she had made her decision. Christmas at the Circle D was a joyous affair. The ranch hands had decorated the cookhouse with pine boughs and ribbons. Kieran had procured a small fir tree for the main house, where they all gathered for Christmas dinner. Emma squealed with delight at her new doll, and Jackson proudly wore his new quilt as a cape until Mrs. Wilson, who had ridden out for the celebration, gently suggested he use it properly. When Kieran unwrapped his shirt, his eyes met Lillian's across the room with such warmth that she blushed and looked away. His gift to her was a delicate silver locket containing miniature portraits of herself and Emma that she hadn't even realized had been taken. Jackson's handiwork, he explained. The boy's got a talent with that camera of his. That evening, with Emma and Jackson engaged in a raucous game of charades with the ranch hands, Kieran drew Lillian onto the porch of the main house. "I have another gift for you," he said, producing a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a key, old, iron, and obviously well used. "It's the key to the Gardner homestead," Kieran explained. "I rode out there last week. The Harrisons moved on. Seems the wife couldn't stand the isolation. The place needs work, but the bones are good. 80 acres, a stream running through it, good grazing land." Lillian stared at the key in her palm. "You went there, in winter?" "I needed to see it to know if it would be suitable." He hesitated. "Suitable for a family," understanding dawned. "Kieran," he took her hands in his. "Lillian Gardner, I know you've had hardship. I know you came west expecting one thing and found another. But sometimes life's detours lead us exactly where we're meant to be." She couldn't help the tears that filled her eyes. "And where is that?" "Home," he said simply. "With people who love you." "People," she whispered. "Me," he clarified, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you, Lillian. I think I started falling for you that first day at the depot when you were trying so hard to be brave for Emma. I'd like to marry you if you'll have me. Make a home with you and Emma at the homestead. Jackson, too, be a family." Lillian's heart swelled with joy. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, I'll marry you." Kieran's face broke into a radiant smile as he gathered her into his arms. His lips found hers in a kiss that promised all the tomorrows they would share. Spring of 1886 brought new beginnings. The Gardner homestead, now the Dawson family home, blossomed under their care. The small cabin was expanded, the fields planted, cattle and horses grazing the fertile pastures. Kieran maintained his position at the Circle D, riding the 5 miles each day, while Lillian transformed the homestead into a true haven. Their wedding in March was a community celebration. Emma, resplendent in a new dress, proudly carried flowers for her mother, while Jackson stood tall beside his uncle. Mrs. Wilson wept happy tears, and even the gruffest ranch hands were seen dabbing suspiciously at their eyes during the ceremony. On a warm evening in late May, Lillian sat on the porch of their home, watching Emma and Jackson chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. Kieran joined her, settling into the chair beside hers and taking her hand in his. "Happy?" he asked, a question he often posed as if still amazed by their good fortune. "Completely," she assured him, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I was thinking about that day at the depot, how desperate I felt, how lost. And now I'm found," she said simply. Kieran squeezed her hand. "You know, I nearly didn't go to town that day. Had a mind to stay at the ranch and finish mending that corral fence." "What changed your mind?" he shrugged. "Something told me I needed to be there. Call it fate or providence or just plain luck." "Whatever it was, I'm grateful," Lillian said softly. "You promised forever that day, even if you didn't say the words outright." "And I meant it," Kieran replied, drawing her close. "Every single day forever." As twilight deepened into night, the children's laughter echoed across the homestead, a sound of joy, of family, of promises kept and dreams fulfilled. For Lillian, who had once wept on a depot bench with no hope in sight, it was the sweetest music imaginable, the soundtrack of her forever with the man who had sat beside her and changed her life with a simple act of kindness.